team? Okay, that's it then. So we're now recording. So the way we're going to run this afternoon is we've got a couple of presentations for you. And we've got Suzanne from the Leicestershire Partnership Trust. She works in the school age immunisation team. And we've got Viv from the public health team. They're going to talk us through the vaccine and the process for vaccination. And then you've got the opportunity after that to ask us any questions. More than happy for you to use the chat bar for that. But if anybody is wanting to speak, keep your camera off. But if you want to speak, you can raise your hand and we can do that. But I'll keep an eye on the chat. So if anyone wants to put anything in the chat while we're going through the presentation, we'll make sure that we pick it up at the end. So I think it's over to Susanna now, and then Viv. Lovely.
Thank you, Caroline. So as Caroline said, I'm Suzanne, and I am supporting on the delivery of the COVID-19 programme for 12 to 15-year-olds in schools. So the first slide is really just to explain a little bit around COVID, what it is, and as it says, it's a very infectious respiratory disease, but very few children and young people with COVID infection actually go on to have any severe disease with this. But one of the reasons that we're offering the vaccination to students and young people is that we want to reduce the amount of time that you're away from your education if you do contact the disease, and also to help reduce the spread of the disease or the infection within the schools. So this programme and the vaccination provides very good protection to yourselves, but also it will help protect the wider community, particularly in the winter months when we do get lots of other viruses around. Thank you. So how are we planning to offer the vaccination? So first and foremost, the vaccination that we'll be offering you is Pfizer, or also known as Comirnaty, which is quite a difficult word to say. We will be running the vaccinations in schools, and the aim is to run them up until the end of November. Now, what you should have received by your school is a link to go on and complete an online consent form. And what we would encourage you to do is, alongside your parents, to sit and have a discussion around the vaccination and around consenting. And we really, really encourage joint sort of ownership of this, and sort of it's a joint decision-making process in regards to completing the consent form. And once you've done that, we encourage you to complete it and return it as soon as possible. Thank you. So the team of staff who come into the schools are very trained, very experienced vaccinators who are very used to giving injections to children and young people. And they will be there to support with any questions or concerns that you may have. One of the key things that has to happen after having this vaccination is that you will need to be observed for 15 minutes, and that will be in the same area of where you've had your vaccinations. Now, you may be asking around other vaccinations of which we would normally have been offering from September through till the end of December. That is HPV and the flu. And just to give you assurance that we will be coming in to offer those, but they'll be at a later date. Thank you. So some of the key questions that people often ask is it safe? It is a very safe vaccination. It has to go through a rigorous route of checking its safety through a regulatory body called the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency. And they confirmed that it's very safe to offer this to 12 to 17-year-olds. And as it suggests there, it goes through a rigorous review of safety, quality and effectiveness for the age group. Thank you. Another key question and frequently asked question is, what are the side effects? Now, like all medicines and vaccines, some people can have some side effects. Not everybody will, but it's just important that you are aware of these. And often these are very mild and very short term. And some of the very common ones are, you can often have a painful, heavy feeling arm, feeling quite tender where the injection is. Now, usually this lasts up to 1 to 2 days. You can sometimes feel a little tired, a bit headachy, and just feel a bit like flu-like symptoms, but these usually do resolve within sort of 1 to 2 days. Thank you. So the eligible age for this vaccination at this point in time is all children aged 12 to 15. And the good thing is at this point in time, it's just 1 dose. So it will be just the 1 injection. And we'll all be coming to schools to offer this vaccination. And the service or the team that you will see on the day is called the School Age Immunisation Team. And they're very, very used to doing vaccination programmes in schools. And you may have already know that a lot of 16 to 17-year-olds have already had this offered. They have a first dose as well, just 1 dose as well. Thank you. So another question is about consent, and if you don't have parental consent, what do we do? So one of the key things is that we really encourage yourself to discuss it with your parents, carers or guardians, engage in a good conversation about the vaccine together as a family, and to come to an agreement together about the consent. There's lots of information around on various websites, government UK websites, and a key website is the Health for Teens, which is a really good website that gives lots of information about vaccinations and key about decision making with consent. So one of the key messages from us is to really proactively talk to your parent, your guardian about the vaccination and you know, in regards to providing consent. Thank you. So we've already alluded to some forums of where you can seek advice, and we're just listing a few here for you. So the Health for Teens website is an excellent website, as are there's a number of online videos available, lots of information on sort of social media accounts, and some really key information on national government websites as well. Thank you. So another key question is, what happens if I'm not in school on the day? So for this age range, we will look at an alternative offer. So if you have provided a consent, then there's the assurance that you will receive the vaccination, and we would work through how that will happen. Thank you. Okay, many thanks, and any key questions?
Thank you. Suzanne, we've got a question in the chat just while we're transferring over to the slides, I think, that whether or not you can have the vaccine if you've had COVID within the last 4 weeks. You're on mute, Suzanne. Yeah. There we go.
Sorry, I'm mute. So you have to have 28 days clear of when you were tested positive for COVID before you can have the COVID vaccination. That's the key thing with this vaccination. And if you did have COVID, it has to be 28 days after 28 days of being tested positive.
Thanks, Suzanne. Caroline, that's a really good question, so thank you for that. I'm sure that's something that lots of people will want to know. And we've popped into the chat the link for the Health for Teens website, so we've got that. So Anita, you've got a question about clarity over future side effects, and gaps between COVID and the HPV vaccine from John. Let's go into, if I may, let's go into Viv's question, get Viv's presentation. Viv, if there's any way you can cover any of these as you go through the presentation, that would be great. But don't worry, if we don't do that, we'll make sure that we pick those up afterwards as separate questions. Thanks then, Viv.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Caroline, and thanks for having me today. So I'm just going to cover some of the key points from a public health point of view, and these are some of the key questions that we get regularly asked about the COVID vaccination generally, and particularly those for the young people's programme. So the question we get asked a lot is the vaccine safe and is it effective? And just want to reassure everybody, there has been a tremendous amount now of trial data around the effectiveness of the vaccination and the safety of the vaccination. So I know there have been concerns in terms of the speed of the vaccination, how quickly it was generated, but I just want to sort of reassure that although the vaccination programme to approach was shortened in terms of timescales, that no shortcuts were made. So the MHRA has a really stringent process in terms of the different styles of phases and trials that any vaccine or medication has to go through. And the difference with the COVID vaccination was that the whole world was working on this, and instead of doing things sort of in parallel, they did them in, instead of doing them one after the other, they did them in parallel. So some of the phases were sort of slightly overlapped, and they looked at the data on an ongoing basis rather than waiting for it at the end. But please do be reassured that the process that was taken to develop this vaccine is exactly the same process that was done for any other vaccine or medication. And the evidence is showing a really effective vaccine that is very safe to use. And now millions of people have had this vaccine. So just want to reassure around that. The other thing I know that many people will be concerned around is around some of the serious side effects that have been identified. And I think we need to acknowledge those, but we do need to acknowledge that these are extremely rare events. And the fact is that we have such a really good system to pick up these very, very rare events that we even know about them. So you may have heard about the discussions around with the AstraZeneca vaccine around blood clotting and platelets, but then particularly for this programme, there are some discussions around heart inflammation with the Pfizer vaccine. And I'll come on to this in a little bit more detail, but there is very clear evidence around the fact that these are extremely rare events. We're talking like a couple in a million. Which is about the same risk of being hit by lightning. So we can't say that it's not there, but it is incredibly low, and we take risks like this every day. So it is just trying to acknowledge it, but put it into a proportionate approach in terms of what things we do every day when we take risks. It might be crossing the road, it might be doing other things. So can we move on to the next one, please? So in terms of what the benefits are for having your COVID vaccine, there's several benefits. So first of all, it reduces your risk of actually catching COVID. So it is worth acknowledging that no vaccine is 100%, but the latest data is showing that you can reduce your likelihood of catching COVID by about 55 to 70%. But obviously no vaccine is 100%, even though these vaccines are incredibly effective and actually more effective than the flu vaccines that we see regularly and some of the other vaccines. So we've got really good vaccines to support us. The really critical thing is it significantly reduces your risk of serious disease. So if you do catch COVID, you're very unlikely to get as unwell as you would have done if you caught it without the vaccine. And the data is showing that, over 90% of hospitalizations that need ICU or intensive care solutions are being reduced by the vaccination programme. So if we think about the levels of cases that we've got circulating in the moment, we are seeing significantly less proportions of people needing hospitalisation and intensive care support and unfortunately dying from where we were, several months ago. So the vaccination programme really is working and it really is effective, particularly in that really severe disease. The evidence is also showing that if you have the vaccine, you're less likely to transmit it or pass it on, and that's reduced by about 40%. So again, we can't say that it's going to completely rule it out, but your likelihood of passing it on is significantly reduced. So that's really important, particularly around who it is you're socialising with. So it may be that if you catch it yourself, that you might feel a little bit rough, that you might not have severe disease, or you might even be asymptomatic. But actually the people you're surrounding yourself with could be much more vulnerable and may be at higher risk of really, really poor outcomes, or really getting really poorly from COVID, and you're doing your little bit to help support reduce that risk. The other thing that it is worth considering is it reduces your risk of long COVID, and there is reports that people that have been vaccinated that have had low COVID are having slight improvement in some of their low COVID symptoms. And some of this is similar a bit like just, having really bad fatigue syndrome, which can really make you feel really quite significantly poorly and really reduce some of the day-to-day life things that you would want to do in terms of physical activity, sport, and feeling well enough to go to school and education. So there is that important benefit to think about as well. So next slide, please. So Suzanne's touched a little bit about the benefits for young people, and we do acknowledge that for younger people, the risk of getting seriously unwell with COVID is significantly less. That doesn't mean that young people don't get really poorly, but we know that overall the risk of getting really, really poorly is a lot less for young people, and many young people are asymptomatic. So we do need to acknowledge that was taken into account when the Joint Committee for Immunisation and Vaccinations came out with their recommendation around whether young people should have the COVID vaccination, and from a specifically just a health benefit, then that's when we know that the benefit is a little bit more in the balance. However, when we then think about the impact that COVID is having on your wider health and well-being, and particularly thinking about how much school time you might miss, the risk of you getting long COVID, and the ability to be able to mix with your peers, but also with your family, your friends, and those more vulnerable individuals in our communities, that's when the balance really tips the other way. So it is more thinking around the benefits of you not catching COVID, not passing it on, more so in terms of the severity of disease, which is why we vaccinated the older population first. So I think that's covered the main things in this. That's the next slide, please. Sorry, can we move on if that's all right? Thank you. So what are the risks? So I've talked about some of the risks of the serious risks previously, and it is just really reiterated, these are extremely rare events. They really are, we are talking a few in a million. And some of the trial data that we have seen on that have been actually in young people of your age, so of 12 to 17-year-olds that have had 1 or 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And we know that the risk of the heart inflammation is around 8 per million or fewer with the Pfizer vaccine. So very, very small. And again, one of the JCVI has taken into consideration that evidence, which is why the recommendation is only to have 1 dose rather than 2 in this age group. We do need to acknowledge, as Suzanne has mentioned, that you might get some side effects from having the vaccine, but I think it's really about the balance of the short-term side effects that you may get, you may not, and it is acknowledging that everybody's different. Some people do feel a bit fluey, some people are absolutely fine, some people do have a sore arm. I know I did have a sore arm when I had my vaccine, but it is really about balancing that between the long-term benefits of you having this vaccine and building that immunity up for yourself and for your family and friends. And I think the other thing as well is we need to be aware about this vaccine has only been out since, for the past sort of 12 to 18 months. So we won't necessarily have data on, vaccine implications for the next 5 years because the vaccine hasn't been around, and we acknowledge that. But what we do know is that we have developed vaccines for a long time, and this vaccine does not contain any live virus. So there is no plausible mechanism in which that we would expect you to have serious long-term side effects, because it has been developed in a way that we have developed vaccines for a long period of time, and so we can use that evidence to think the mechanisms are going to be very similar. So I'll move on to the next slide, please. So we've had lots of discussion, and I know there's been lots of concerns around menstrual cycle and fertility. So just wanted to talk about this in a little bit more detail. So we acknowledge that there has been sort of a lot of anecdotal reports around the vaccination and having impacts on the menstrual cycle, so having an impact on your period. So it might be a bit heavier, it might be a bit later, might come a bit early, might come a bit late. But what we do know is that we see this with quite a lot of other vaccines. So the HPV is another example of this. And although we don't know the exact mechanism in terms of why this is happening, we think this is probably due to some sort of immune reaction to the vaccination that's affecting the lining of the womb, or changes in your hormone balance that are triggering your period in a slightly different way. And these are things that you will experience if you are a woman that are having periods that happen regularly in different times of your life, whether you've had an illness yourself or whether you've been stressed, your period might be affected in a slightly different way. And it's a similar approach with the vaccine. What we do know is that we've seen that this is a transient, so it's a really short-lived effect, and it will probably only happen for 1 or 2 cycles. So it is a temporarily change to your cycle, and it's just to reassure you that there is no long-term effect on people's fertility. So it's not going to affect your ability to get pregnant in later life. And we know that there's been hundreds and thousands of people now that have gone on to have successful pregnancies following the vaccination. And I think the other thing just to really highlight is that when we talk about what the vaccine does and how it works, there's no plausible mechanism in which case that it will impact on your fertility. So the way the vaccine works is the vaccine is introduced to your body sees it as something foreign, and it produces an immune response. And it's your immune response that is the same as if you catch a cold, that your body produces antibodies and T cells and C cells to support that. And that's the bit that stays with you. The actual components of the vaccine are removed from your body within a couple of days. So it's just to reassure you that they're not hanging around in your body for a long time, but it's almost the memory within your body has already seen this foreign body before and can remember it, and then can respond to it very quickly if it sees it again in the future. I think the other thing just to reiterate as well is that the COVID vaccine now, we've got really good data around people that are pregnant and breastfeeding having the vaccine, and it is safe for them to do so. And with what we are seeing is actually there's benefits of having the vaccine if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, because we know that that passive immunity that your body's building is then passed onto your body and onto your baby, whether that's your unborn baby through the umbilical cord, or whether that's because you're breastfeeding through your breast milk. So there's actually real benefits for having the vaccine if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. And I think that's it for me at the moment. I'll hand back to Caroline.
Thank you, Viv. Right, we're just going to come back to all of us, so thank you. Welcome to those that have joined us a little later. I've got the sun on my screen. Let's move around a touch. Welcome to everyone who's joined us. We have videoed the start of the presentation, or all of the presentation, so just to let you know that it is being videoed. Just really to say that we're asking people to keep cameras off because we know that people won't want their faces all over the internet, and to use the chat or to put the hand up if they want. So hopefully that's okay. We've got some questions then that have popped up in the chat, and I'll go through them in order if I may. So we've had the response to the question about if you've had the vaccine, if you've had COVID in the last 4 weeks, and the answer to that is that you need to leave it for 28 days. That's good. Clarity over future side effects based on the current data. I think Viv, you went into that really well in terms of what those side effects are, and Suzanne, you picked up some of the side effects, more the localized side effects around this. So Anita, I'm hoping that that's covered your question there. If not, pop something back in the chat and we can come back to it. John, you've asked whether or not what the margin should be between the COVID vaccination and the HPV vaccine. Volunteers, Viv or Suzanne, to respond to that? Suzanne looks like she's reaching for the unmute button.
So the recommendation, I think that will support this, is that with any vaccine, after if you've had the COVID, you have to have a 7-day gap of any other vaccine. So that would be the same for HPV. They can still have the HPV, but this vaccine suggests that it has to be a 7-day gap before having another vaccine.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. And a follow-up one from Caroline here.
Sorry, Caroline, can I just come
sorry,
in on that? Yeah, just thinking around the flu vaccine. So there is tweaks to the guidance around the Green Book guidance around the vaccine. So if it's a case of you were wanting to have the flu vaccine at the same time, you can have that co-administered. So it's more around if the vaccine's alive or not. So for older people, they can't have the shingles vaccine, for example. But if you can have a 7-day window, then that's great. But if actually it works out better for you to have your, say, your flu jab and your COVID jab at the same time, then that would work. But obviously that does take into account which flu jab you have, because depending on which one you have depends on what type of vaccine it would be. Yeah. And obviously the children have the slightly different flu jab.
Thanks. Yeah. And I think from an HPV perspective, I think from a practical perspective, we've stolen all the clinics for HPV vaccination, I think. So the school immunisation team will be coming back in to do that vaccination programme. Okay, so yeah, right, Caroline, follow-up question to yours. So if we're having to wait 28 days after you've had a positive COVID test, then will you be offered another vaccine, and how, another time for a vaccine, and how will that work? So Suzanne, I think that's a question for you, as how will, and I think there's probably a broader question as to if we miss children, or if they haven't done the consent in time and those sorts of things, how are we going to get back to children?
So we're currently working through the logistics of this to enable that every child who's received we've received a consent form that will be provided with, sorry, I can't get my words out, will be offered the vaccination, and we'll aim to get vaccinated. So we're just, as I say, working through the logistics of that. Yeah.
So I think it's got to be a case of watch this space. We will come back to you. We won't leave you out. The view from the national team, and this is part of a national programme, is they want these vaccines to be vaccinated in school, children to be vaccinated in schools. But we absolutely acknowledge from a practical perspective that that's not going to be the right thing for everybody. So we're still working on that plan, and we'll keep you informed on that one. So keep looking out for that. Hayley, you've asked the question about inflammation of the heart being a side effect. Viv, you did pick that up in your presentation, so thank you for that. And again, if it doesn't quite cover it, Hayley, then pop something else in. Stu's asked, your boy had COVID 7 weeks ago, he's 12, only poorly for 1 day, that's really good. Is it worth having a vaccination so quickly after having the virus? Looks like Suzanne, are you coming in on that one, or yeah?
Sorry, I do apologise. So which question?
Sorry, do you want me to cover that one?
Suzanne? I want to cover that one.
Yeah,
that's fine. Thank
you. Yeah, so I think really great to hear that your son was only poorly for 1 day. That's brilliant, and I'm glad to hear he's well on the way to recovering. What I would say though is the antibodies that you produce from the vaccination to whether you get COVID are potentially slightly different, and there are also lots of different variants circulating. So I would really recommend that your son still does have the vaccine, even though he has had COVID fairly recently, because all it's going to do is build his immunity. So if there are different variants that circulate, he's got the best chance to be as well as possible if it comes around later on.
Thanks, Viv. Tom. Next question there from sorry, that's just moved on my, we've had another one in and it's moved it up. Yeah, from iPhone. A really good question again, and something that a lot of children will suffer from. So if a child suffers from a severe nut allergy, are there any risks from the vaccine from that perspective? No, people, so Both Viv and Suzanne are shaking their head, and that feels like it's just a straight no. And it's always important to share what allergies people have got when you come into a vaccination site, but it looks okay. Viv, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in terms of, there's been quite a lot of discussion around allergies and who can and can't have the vaccine. And I think really the vaccine is shown to be incredibly safe. It's not a live virus, so you know it is a really safe vaccine to have. And actually the only people that generally can't have the vaccine are those that actually have a specific allergic reaction to the components of the vaccine. So obviously if you have concerns, make sure that you share that with your GP or you know the vaccinator in front of you. But actually there's only a very, very small proportion of people that can't have this vaccine.
Thanks, Viv. Next question, Leanne. You've said that your mother was killed by the vaccine in April, and how can we guarantee that it won't harm your child? And I'm so sorry to hear that you know we've had a tragic event following a vaccination. And I know, and Viv talked about the fact that, you know, from in the early days around the AstraZeneca vaccine, we found some side effects from that. But Viv, can I look to you to thinking about that and talking through the safety aspects from a children's perspective?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm really sorry to hear that news, Leanne. I can't imagine how hard that would have been for you and your family. So we do, you know, send our sincere thoughts with you. What I would say is that these tragic events have happened. We acknowledge that they have happened, and we have seen those with the AstraZeneca vaccine. But the evidence has shown that these are incredibly rare. That's the message that I really would reiterate here is that we do know about these rare events, but the only reason why we know about them is because millions and millions of people have now had these vaccinations, and if they hadn't have had those vaccinations, then we wouldn't have seen these incredibly rare events. That doesn't mean that if you don't have concerns, you should absolutely make sure you have discussions with your healthcare professional or your GP around those. And if there are particular concerns that you have, particularly around your child, that may think that they are greater risk of those things, then by all means have those conversations. But I would just reiterate that these events are incredibly rare. We are talking, 8 in a million people or less, and that's with 2 doses, not even with 1. So yes, it is a balance of risk that you will need to make a decision on yourself, and you need to be comfortable with that. But please do be assured that these are incredibly safe vaccines, and these severe results are incredibly rare, and we know more and more about them now as well, so they can be identified a lot earlier on.
Thank you, Viv. Yes, our hearts absolutely go out to you, but I think that's a really important message, that as anyone has got any anxieties around this, please speak to people about it. What we don't want is people worrying about sending their children into school for a vaccine that they don't really understand about. So encouraging people to come on the webinars, but like Viv says, talk to your healthcare professional, and please, I know lots of our GPs are really keen to talk to people about the vaccination if they've got specific clinical concerns, so we'll do that. Question now from Galaxy Note 8. Daughter's turning 11 years, she's still 11, sorry, turning 12 in December. So when will she get her vaccine? Suzanne, you're familiar with the age range cut-off, aren't you? Do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, so the age range is currently, according to our legal element of how from what we work from, something called our PGD, is when you're 12 to 15, and so you have to be 12 when we actually visit the session, and then obviously as children start to turn 12, then we'll need to work through how those children are offered the vaccinations. It's slightly different to the flu, which is actually done by academic years. So this vaccine, nationally, it's been agreed and signed off that it'll be done by age, and it has to be 12 on the date of the session. So yeah, it's slightly different to how the flu is. So yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think it's back to that same answer we gave earlier as to this isn't going to be a one-stop offer. Is that, you know, we've got a part of the programme that we understand at the moment. We're on a daily basis planning for further rollout of it. So it will happen. We just need to get that information to you. Okay, Anita, you're asking whether or not children would need a booster each year. Obviously, yes, we're going into the booster programme for adults, and we have a booster programme for flu. I'm not sure if we know the answer to that one yet, actually, Viv, but it's a good question. Is there anything on the horizon that you know of?
I mean, there's nothing on the horizon that I know of. I can't rule it out, is the honest answer, because we need to see how the virus evolves and emerges. Obviously with flu, we do know that virus evolves seasonally, which is why we have to tweak the vaccine every year just to make sure it's the most effective that we can. I mean, certainly at the moment, there is no discussions around that. Obviously, we have got the booster programme for older people and for our vulnerable cohorts 1 to 9 at the moment. So I can't guarantee it at the moment. There's nothing put on the table at the moment, but the honest answer is I couldn't rule it out. We just have to see how the virus evolves and how we all evolve with building our herd immunity across our population. So everybody will have a bit of immunity, so that will support that as well. So we'll just have to wait and see, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Thank you, Viv. Yeah, and so it's a case of watch this space. Amy, you've asked, if you decline the first offer, what's the process if you change your mind? Would it be offered again in the future? It will, but it's back to Suzanne's earlier comment about how we'll do that. We'll have to get back to you on that. Our aim is to get through the majority of students that we can, pupils in the schools, and get them vaccinated, and we can do that in large blocks as we go through each of the schools. But we know we're going to have to do loads of what we would call mop-up exercises, and find ways to bring either people into different places or go back to schools, and we just don't know what that looks like at the moment, but we will keep you updated with that, because absolutely understand that you might just not be in the right place at the time that we're coming in. Every right to change your mind and want it at a later date. So yes. Okay. By my reckoning, I haven't got any more questions in the chat. Just just checking with my colleagues that there aren't any that I can't see. You never know, technology fails anything. We've got a few more minutes left on the webinar, so if anybody wants to ask anything. We do have some information around pop-ups, and Suzanne, I wonder whether or not you're wanting to say anything about what we're doing for pop-ups. There's some of our more ad hoc clinics that are in place.
We're still working through the logistics of those, Caroline. So I think at this point in time, it's difficult for me to say anything further until we've got real confirmation on them, if that's okay.
Yeah, so what you might see coming in the on our websites is that in the way that we've been describing that we're trying to make sure that we're mopping up children that haven't been done in schools, you may find that we're just we have a random clinic pop up somewhere, and that's literally what it is. It's a random clinic. So so they might be the solution to those children who haven't been able to get it through the school process, or just weren't in the space to do it at the time. And so keep an eye out for those. Karen, that's great. You've asked a question about allergy to penicillin. So you guess you're okay with vaccines. That's what you've picked up from today's session, and that's absolutely right. Yes. And is the vaccine safe if a child has mild asthma? Again, yes. The answer to that is yes. We're obviously encouraging it for children who have got what we're classing as clinically vulnerable children. So we've been working with those children for a number of weeks now to get people with more severe conditions than asthma vaccinated through the programme. And so mild asthma is absolutely fine. Yeah, I can speak from experience on that one. So will the flu vaccine be available to year 8 who are not having the COVID vaccine? That's a good question, Dan. I think that came direct to me, so it's not in the general chat. So Suzanne, Dan's asking, will the flu vaccine be available to year 8 who are not having the COVID vaccine?
Yes. So this year, so this seasonal flu year, we are offering the flu vaccinations to all children who are in reception age up until year 11. So it's this year we have an extended flu programme which is covering some of the secondary academic years, which previously we haven't done. So that offer will be to those academic years, which makes it a little bit easy because it's very distinct, years. So the answer in short is yes, they will.
Yeah, that's the important question. We've got to a yes. Thank
Caroline,
you.
Sorry, can I just add to that, if that's all right? So I think just talking about the flu vaccination as well, I think it is just worth highlighting how much we would endorse the flu vaccination as well as the COVID vaccination. We've had a long time in lockdown where we just haven't been mixing in the same way, and those viruses just haven't circulated in the same way. So we are anticipating it could be a harder flu season this year, as well as a hard winter for COVID. So really would recommend people get the advice and the support they need, but would really endorse having both those vaccinations to get prepared for this winter.
Yeah. And Flo, am I right in saying, and Suzanne, that the vaccine for children is flu vaccine is a nasal spray?
Yeah, so for majority of children it is, unless they have a underlying health condition which doesn't enable them to have a live vaccine, which the nasal spray is, or if for a religious reason or a cultural reason they would prefer their child not to have the nasal spray, the alternative is an injectable, and that would be so for children with underlying health conditions who aren't able to have the live vaccine. So most of the time it is a nasal spray, so a little squirt of medicine at the nose.
That's great. Thanks, Suzanne. That's helpful. Okay, just looking at the chat. Claire, oh, thank you, Claire. Some positive feedback for us there. That is our aim. We're hoping to be able to share information and try and address concerns. So, if we haven't done that, then please let us know if there's anything more that you need, because it helps us shape them for future webinars, and get those frequently asked questions updated, so other people who might not be able to come on the webinars can see the questions. But thank you, Claire, for that feedback. That's lovely. Is there anything anybody else wants to raise? It's been a few minutes since anyone's put anything in the chat, so I'm making the assumption that we've got you to a level of understanding, I'm hoping. So in that case, if nothing, I don't want to keep you for no reason. So I think we'll say thank you to Suzanne and to Viv for their presentations, and particularly from my perspective, thank you both for answering the questions, because that's really helpful. I think you've been able to bring this to life through the presentations and the answers to questions. And thank you to everybody who have joined us. We couldn't do this without you. You definitely make it possible for us to really feel that we're getting underneath some of the concerns of people whose children or who are going through this process themselves. So thank you for that. I wish you a lovely early afternoon, early evening, whatever it is, and we may see you again on another one. So thank you.